Hey everybody, welcome to our Module 24, the Michigan EMS Instructor Coordinator module. We'll be talking about this in Module 25, which are really the ones focused specifically around the Michigan modules. This is going to kind of be as a preface to the lecture that will be held by the state of Michigan, by the EMS Education Coordinator, either Terry Godey or Amanda Kindy. Both of them will be joining us later in his Teams meeting to be able to outline their specifics, but I wanted to go through some of the core information with you so you had a better understanding of what you're kind of diving into as you look at the Michigan specifics. Now, a lot of these concepts we have talked and discussed throughout all of our modules in the online learning, but we like to kind of wrap up the program with more Michigan specific items, specifically because you're going to see those when you go to take your IC licensing exam. So let's go ahead and get started. The first document that I have pulled up here is the Michigan EMS Instructor Coordinator Education Program Curriculum. This covers both initial, refresher, and continuing education requirements for the EMS Instructor Coordinator. This is a really nice update to what has been created previously by the state. A lot of times before, it was all kind of jumbled in with the DOT guidelines from 2002, and now we're seeing these as a supplemental module, which I think is a much more succinct way and more accurate way of covering the state's content, and then also making sure that we're not clouding or garbling up any of the other DOT satellite curriculum, especially as that looks to update hopefully here in the near future. One of the big things that I think it's important when we start to think about the curriculum is that there is an authority that authorizes this curriculum to stand as it does. And this is Public Act 368 as amended recently, or as amended to be current from its original version from 1978. This again is going to be a different public act that you'll need to use. It's going to be different than Public Act 179, which founded EMS. This is looking at specifically for the state and its curriculum. The last update that did occur for the state was in September of 2022, and they continue to look to upgrade that again here recently, and I'm lucky enough to have been able to hopefully participate in that as the state looks to update their curriculum. So again, if we take a look here, you can see that this PDF document has a nice table of contents. It's going to talk to us a lot about the specific aspects that we need to think within the Michigan modules for objectives, and then specifically coordination issues for Michigan EMS instructor coordinators for Module 25. So we'll go ahead and we're going to jump right on into this here. I'm going to go ahead and jump here to page 11. And you're going to be able to see some of the core information. These are going to be the prime examples of your instructor breakdown of the objectives that we have gone over thus far. But again, they're going to focus specifically on Michigan's aspects. So a couple of things here. Terry will be able to explain this, or Amanda will be able to explain this in great more detail than I. But we do know that we are governed underneath the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Bureau of EMS and Trauma Preparedness is the new title of the organization that oversees EMS education. You are going to have a regional coordinator. That regional coordinator in here for Calhoun County or for Battle Creek is Matt Godey. And that's the individual that, and you're going to have different ones depending on the region that you live in or you're hosting your training in across the state. But that regional coordinator is there to help vet your curriculum, to vet things that you submit as an individual IC, to vet items that you submit in for both initial and continuing education. When those are in, those are vetted by those individuals. And there's some awesome tools that we've been able to use to help you as those documents, whether CEs or initial education, get submitted. And those rubrics for your CEU aspect we've used as we did our online lesson plans for continuing education. So that's going to be the role that you're going to see of the regional coordinators. They're going to be your primary point of contact. They're going to be the individual you're going to look to for the review of your content you submit. And then again, they report or work with, I should say, the education coordinator within the state. Again, we have to recognize and understand that Public Act 368 of 1978, as amended, is what governs us for the curriculum for EMS instruction, I should say, in general. And then we have to also be aware of the Michigan laws specifically, along with the medical legal curriculum. This is an area that when I do instruction for med legal, I make sure, and we should, regardless, make sure every student gets this packet because it's important for us to have consistency in the way we educate, not only from the textbook or from your national curriculum, but also to make sure that we're meeting the state-specific requirements when it comes to things like laws and oversight and regulatory bodies, those things. And so that aspect of my legal curriculum is a really nice packet to be able to use. And you can find a link to that right here as well. We also have to understand the administrative rules and the administrative policies that exist from the state. A lot of these are going to be hyperlinked, so if you were to click on them, sometimes I can get them to click and sometimes I can't. It doesn't look like I can get them to open up this time, at least on my computer, but you should be able to find these again from the state's website, and I'll show you some locations where we can see those later on. The second aspect that we look at is going to be understanding the EMS education program sponsor approval process. We need you to be able to plan a full course schedule. You're going to have to be able to explain the documentation for course completion, what requirements exist, and then what are the options that you have for virtual training, as there's a number of policies and procedures, specifically, again, within initial education, that we need to make sure that we're covering. The other aspect we see is continuing education, and this again is where we want to make sure that you understand what the requirements are for CEUs within the state of Michigan, especially since they've changed. Some folks who've been in the business long enough have seen, remember when we had to have said number of practical credits and said number of face-to-face lecture style credits, and then we were able to use some online technology, and then slowly we moved away from practical skills. And we're getting to a much better way of looking at how we ensure our continuing education as EMS providers. But there's a number of things that we have to think about, policies and procedures, to understand what is current, so that way we're up to date on that. And that's going to be the things, again, that Terry and Amanda will discuss, but it's really important that you are understanding that the breadth of the depth of that, right, that there's more to it. So a couple key things that you'll want to make sure you're going to look at when it comes to continuing education is, number one, is to use those rubrics and guides as you look to write your lesson plans for CEUs. We also want to make sure that when you're doing a virtual options that you understand and have policies and procedures in place. And again, there's a written policy on the state's website for the virtual education. And then you've got to recognize also that you've got standardized stuff, right? So if you're doing a standardized class, like a BLS class or an ACLS class, those canned courses are oftentimes listed in the Standardized EMS Continuing Education Guidebook, sometimes referred to as the Blue Book for EMS credits. And it's things that if you have a certification card or you have a certification through, if it's listed in the Blue Book, you can just use that credential to be, as long as it's current, to be able to get certain CEs. So you don't have to issue CEs if you're issuing a certification for a PALS or a ACLS provider class, let's say. So those are going to be there as well too. And then you got to have an understanding of the specific guidelines that go along with continuing education approvals. And again, those are really important aspects to look at. I'm struggling to be able to open those hyperlinks, unfortunately. Again, Terry will be able to talk about those and go through and show you some of those aspects that when she's here. The other aspect we think of is for licensure process. We need to make sure we understand, as first and foremost, what your education requirements are for licensure at the instructor coordinator level, the application process, the renewal process. Again, a lot of that has changed. And you're going to be walking students through this process if you're doing initial education, or you'll be using MyEMSIS to be able to issue CEs and things as an individual IC. And so, again, we want to make sure that you understand that application, that renewal process, and all those other components. And I'll show you where some of these are going to be listed on the website for the state in a moment. For the examination process, we've got to discuss what NREMT eligibility is for MFR, EMR, EMT specialist, and paramedic. We have to think about what criminal convictions and what state laws regarding criminal convictions may prevent a student from obtaining national certification and or licensure. And we also have to think about the accommodations that are necessary to make for students who have known disabilities and or documented proven disabilities. I will tell you, in my experience, the NREMT has gotten to be a lot easier to work with when it comes to ADA accommodations. It seems like not that long ago, 10 plus years at least, that they did not have some of those same components. But even though it was the law of the land and there were some aspects of it, it was difficult to figure out how to be able to do some of those things. And we've gotten to be much more organized and a much cleaner process. Still takes a little bit of time and energy to get a student to get that approved through registry. But they will make those reasonable accommodations, but they may request additional documentation and other aspects. So Those are things that we want to make sure that we're aware of, so that way we can help our students be able to get to that test, to get those accommodations in a timely fashion, so we're not holding up their testing experience. We know that MFRs can test up to 3 times within a 2 year of a course completion. All other levels may test up to 6 times within a 2-year completion. However, after the 3 attempts that are failed, they have to go back and do that refresher course in order to be able to earn those additional 3 attempts to earn the total of 6 attempts to test. And again, the instructor coordinator application for testing and licensure is its own unique process, since it is governed by the state of Michigan. Psychomotor exam administration, we got to talk about how the NREMT eligibility and requirements for the psychomotor exam for each level. We know that we're now using the new user guides for the integrated out-of-hospital scenario-based training. This is using a medical, a trauma, and a pediatrics scenario. Again, typically adult or geriatrics are going to be your medical and trauma, and then your pediatric could be any type of medical and or trauma emergency that you might see. So those user guides are going to be important, and I'll show you what some of those look like here in just a second. We also want to make sure that we explain what stations are going to be required for each of the students that are there, and that we prepare them for that. If you're not doing scenario-based training in your MFR or EMT class, and you're typically doing isolated skill training or lecture-based training and not a lot of team or scenario simulation aspects, your students may really struggle when they get to that final exam, because it's a performance-based review. It's designed for them to be able to demonstrate the cohesion of their knowledge, right? As they've built to gain all of this great knowledge, they're going to be showing you patient assessment and airway management and scene safety and reassessments and treatments and interventions and you name it, right? And so medication administrations, all the other things that go in their skills. It's going to be difficult for a student to assemble all of that together into this performance if you've never practiced it, right? And I know that as we initially adopted with our first cohort this model, we had a little bit of struggles because the students weren't as used to doing that level of rigor, that level of realism when it came to their scenario, to their final simulations. And that was mostly with our MFR class. Our EMT program, we use a lot of simulation, do a lot of scenario-based learning. It's a hybrid program. But you got to make sure you kind of think about that. Are you preparing your students for the examination that you're about to put before them? Not necessarily preparing them to be able to recall all the crazy content that you're covering, but do they understand how a scenario works? A lot of times when we're dealing with young students or not yet quite adult students, we'll talk about in a moment, they too also will, if you say, hey, go do a scenario, they don't really know what that is. They don't have the life experience to understand some of those concepts. So that's something to think about. The other big important part for skill training and psychomotor evaluation is inter-rater reliability. It's really important that as a program coordinator or an instructor coordinator, that you are making sure that any of your content experts or any of the people coming in to perform the psychomotor exam, that they are going to be able to have consistency in the way in which that they pass and or fail or realistically evaluate students. We all know that there are providers that love to come in and just prove that they are better than others, and they love to fail students. And we know that there are some that come in and it doesn't matter if the person, completely botched the scenario, they showed up, so they think that's enough to make them pass. You can't have that large of a spectrum when it comes to evaluation for there to be reliability in the way you perform the exam. You want, no matter who is evaluating that station, that the results should be consistent for all students amongst all stations that are assessed in the same fashion. And that's where inter-rater reliability comes in. These are going to be a conversation or an actual training where you're going to learn to evaluate the same way every time. And the best way to do that is at the beginning of each exam. Most of our classes start in the late afternoon, around 5:15 or so. But we have our instructors come in about 4:30 to help set up. And then we also do inter-rater reliability review or training. And that's going to be where we sit down together and we talk about the exam. We talk about the importance of what certain aspects of the evaluation sheet mean, and have conversations about what do you think would be a critical criteria, or what do you think would be an example of a 2 versus a 3 versus a 1 on the ranking scale. And then it gives us a chance to unite and kind of have a composed process to ensure that all of our evaluators are evaluating fairly. By doing so, we help ensure that the process is clear and that the evaluation process is fair for the students, equitable, and reliable, that it's more valid because of that process. Now, when we start to look at, so those are kind of just the generic stuff that's key for the state of Michigan. One of the things that I really do want to talk about is some of these aspects of the state of Michigan's website. Okay, so here I have my website up. I'm going to go to michigan.gov/EMS. And this is going to be one of the primary landing spots that you're going to be able to see kind of as you kind of go down through your website here. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's on the state website. You got to click and find stuff. I mean, the best way to navigate this, to learn it, is to search for things. Because a couple things I'll tell you. The state's website's always updating. So if you're going to use a document, you need to go to the website first to find the most recent document. That's true for any location. The second big thing that you've got to think about is by learning to navigate it and learn where things are, you're going to start to be able to find what resources and tools that are there. Probably some stuff that you may not have even known that are there that are helpful, right? And from my own experience, no matter how many times you sit through a state presentation, the more you just click and dive around their website, the better off that you're going to be able to be. And that's the same for the states, for if it's COAMPS, if it's NAEMT, no matter what it is, use the online portion because it's the most recent documents that'll be out there, the most current information. There was even a test question for this week's module that I had a couple of them actually. I had to go back and change because the answers are changed because we changed the way that we do the psychomotor exam. We've changed the way that we do CEUs. There's things that constantly have to be updated with that to make sure that that content is relevant. So we're going to really focus on the educational component. So you can see this bullet point down here where it says education. And that's going to take us to another landing page where we got scope of practice and we've got educational information. I'm going to go scope of practice first just to kind of show you. National scope of practice as of 2/24, right? So you're looking for your most national guidelines. There they are. And your Michigan scope of practice model from April of 2024. Both very recent, right? So when you're thinking about teaching national and local content, here's a great place to be able to touch base with what the state specifically wants you to do. Again, with national stuff, you may want to look at their website to see if there's a more recent current version that may exist. Most of the time you're going to spend your efforts here in the educational information side though. And here you're going to see a number of different aspects that go along with things here. Education program resources is a spot that I probably spend 99% of my time, but that's there. There's the NREMT, NCCP state requirements. You can see what that looks like here. It's going to take you up to a PDF document. So again, it talks to you about what national, state, individual criteria all looks like, required for all levels, required for local and state, required CEs here, and then some of the webinars and things that are in there. This is pretty old, but nonetheless, it is there for you to be able to have as access. The EMS Code of Ethics, this is important because one of the areas you have to make sure that you're instructing is going to be the Code of Ethics for EMS for the state of Michigan, and then also the National EMS Code of Ethics. These are really important documents that you share with your students. If you don't start out by sharing what your values, the morals, the ethical considerations of why we do what we do, you're not going to really be able to help embody and I shouldn't even say embody, that's not the word I'm looking for, to impress upon your students or for them to embody the morals and values that we need to see for professionals within the EMS industry. And this is just a couple page document. It talks about who kind of helped put all this together, talks about some assumptions, the concepts of vocabulary, things you need to know to read this. And then if we keep scrolling down, you'll start to see some ethical principles for basics, for conduct, things that the state wants us to be able to see, things like veracity, ethical behavior, confidentiality, just a really nice way of kind of laying out what all of this looks like from the original EMS Code of Ethics from back in 1978. And again, the state of Michigan wants to establish its own ethical components for this. And so this is what they look at with the Star of Life. There's, again, a total of 6 core areas: veracity, beneficence, non-malfeasance, fidelity, justice, and autonomy. Those are going to be big core aspects that we want to see within the EMS system for the state of Michigan. So that's something you definitely should be using. You should also be pulling up aspects of the National EMS Code of Ethics as well too, and that can be found ems.gov. I also use it through the National Association of EMTs. Your standard ICE guidebook is right here. And again, so you're going to be able to see, like, this guy is right here. You can go back in time depending on where you were and what was going on at the time. But for 24, I can go through and hey, I decided, or I had a student or a colleague at work who I help comes to me as an IC that wants to know, what do I get for taking this, this hazmat class that I went and took? And you're like, I don't really know much about that. So it's going to, again, this document will give you an overview of what it's for. It talks about what the changes are each time that there are individual changes. Some of the things that they've done with Fire Instructor 1 and how that converts it and or works backwards or forwards for an IC. All that stuff is in here as well too. Again, more information about the specific CEs. But I went out and I took that took that hazardous materials class, and so I'm going to come down here. I'm going to see if I can find, hey, you know what I took? I took that, let's see, Hazmat Technician HazWhopper Refresher course here. I can click here on this link, and it's going to tell me as a paramedic, I'm going to be able to get 1 credit for preparatory, and I can get 7 credits in operations for preparedness for a total of 8 credits. No matter what, that certificate is going to get me those credits, and I can use that certificate, upload it to the state when I do my renewal or when I get audited. Or to maintain that database, if that's what you're doing, I can keep that there for it. But again, you can see that there are just a number of these that do exist. I'll try to find one more for you. Like again, advanced, I think there's probably like a basic, there's no basic wilderness life support. But let's say that I did the advanced wilderness life support because I've taken that before. And that advanced wilderness life support, again, is going to give me a total of 18 credits. And you can, again, see where I'm at based on those specific levels. And that's really cool. So this is a nice way of being able to say, hey, if you got something already on the books, why don't you try to give them CEs for it? Or let them, I shouldn't say give them CEs, let them know that there are CEs that they can capture for this using that credential. So that's really a great resource also. Michigan Paramedic Accreditation. So if you're ever trying to figure out what's going on with Michigan Paramedic Accreditation, you can easily see where everybody's at here. You can see KCC. We got our primary location, and we do have a satellite there in Coldwater, one of the few locations that do have a satellite. And you can be able to kind of see where everybody else is at. There is a memo here from the state back in 2012. This is right when I got my started full-time in education. This was big hopping news at the time that the state of Michigan was going to require the Committee on Accreditation to be involved in their approval in order to be able to host a paramedic program, whether that's in the letter of review process, which is the initial stage, the ISSR, or initial self-study review, or a continuing self-study review. You have to have some type of governance by COAMPS in order for you to graduate and have students in Michigan take the NREMT exam. So if you ever question about that, there's always a lot of buzz about that. This is currently the law of the land. And then if you need CEUs or someone says, hey, I need CEUs, and you think you can't help them right at the last second, there's stuff offered by the department all the time. One of the big ones, maybe not, let's see if there's one under preparatory instructor. So here are some of the primary ones that you can see. A lot of these are going to be through MyTrain, right? So maybe the history of EMS here. This is actually a really good one to watch. Or maybe you're going to have your students do some of these, right? So maybe you're doing an online class and you're trying to say, I got to teach history of EMS. What the heck am I going to do? Maybe I have my students go here and work on the history of EMS, or take the EMS documentation lesson here. Or maybe I use this for extra credit, right? Those are going to be some opportunities that you can see. Some trauma ones as well, too. There are some... Trying to see if there's any of these that are on here. BLS portfolios. So again, here's the BLS psychomotor exam that's on here. Program director and program sponsored representative training is here as well too. This is a great one for you guys to do. I probably should put that on the class for you actually. And then continuing education, e-licensing portal application process training. I think some of these are going to be some of the things that I start to include a little bit later on here. Test item writing. Here's another really awesome one that you can be able to see. Basic psychomotor exam training. These are all great ways not only to help you prepare for your IC exam, but also to get some CEUs after you have your IC license. There's nothing wrong with going back and taking those again too. But you can see there are a number of these. And I do know that they are a little bit behind in updating some of their webinars. There's a number of them that I've even helped presented with on active learning and things like that in the classroom. Those are they're always adding more to this. And so as they get caught up a little bit more, you should be able to see a lot more opportunities for education. The state is really trying to help improve the education and provide more education in a global format for the entire region. So with that, let's now go ahead and take a look at the program resources that you're going to start to see in here. And some of these we're going to come back to as we look at the Module 25 aspect for specific roles of the EMS Instructor Coordinator. First things off the top, the two folks you need to make sure you have their contact information for, because if you have questions before you mess something up or before you go forth and conquer, ask. It's never too early to ask for help, but it sure as heck can be too late. And that's something I tell all of my students, and that's something I think the state should tell every IC, is you have got to make sure you know your policies and procedures, or you're going to end up really getting frustrated with yourself mostly. So know these guys' information. Make sure that you work to communicate with them. Attend webinars hosted by these gals. This is the best way to get the most latest information that you can. If you are also using the website and you're going to find that, hey, you know, I got a lot of Adobe Forms because that's what the state uses. I don't have Adobe Reader, and I need help being able to fill out these forms because they will only accept typable PDFs now. They don't accept your own homemade documents. It's not secure. It's not safe. It's not, you know, it takes a lot of file management to do. They want you to use Adobe Reader, and so there's ways in which you can get that software for free here, so you can be able to view and type and submit those forms per requesting for the state. In big, bold letters, you're trying to create an e-licensing account, click here, right? So if you're going to try to help your students when you create your e-licensing account, it's something that you're going to have to do for them. You're going to go ahead and get them set up for the NREMT as for initial education, and then you're also going to make sure that you've got your profile for the e-licensing. That way they can have their state license. This profile will then be used not only for their licenses, but for CEUs, any aspects of that. So they're going to need this profile for their entire career. So it's important that they get this set up and that we work with them to be able to do that. There is a user guide that you can click on here. You should be able to. I'm not sure why the hyperlinks aren't working for me today, guys. But there is a user guide for that as well too, on how to be able to create that. If you go to, let me see here. If I go to the actual portal, I got a quick link saved here. Right at the top, you've got a user guide here for education. That's the form that they're really looking to use. I'll probably put this on Moodle as well for you. But again, it's not a real long document. If it will load. There we go. But it talks to you about applying to teach a CE in the CE portal, entering the CE information, entering the category information, uploading the required documents, and then finalizing the roster. It's not impossible to do, but it definitely is something that can be really helpful for you. Now down here, you're going to find that you've got information about initial education and continuing education. These are where you're going to find a lot of the key information here. One of the things that we're going to actually go over today will be the Program Director Manual, because this is a really important tool as you're looking to get things rolled out. Historically, we didn't have this. You just had a bunch of rules written down, and sometimes in multiple different locations, and you just had to be able to find it. State, again, has been, in its wisdom, has been able to get a whole lot more organized to provide instructors with resources, manuals, guidelines to be able to do what they're requesting, not only to support the process and to make their lives easier, but to help ensure that we don't have to search so much to find the answers we're looking for. And I'll go ahead and I'll show you that here in a little bit when we get back to that. Approved program sponsors is going to show you where all your current approved program sponsors are. For your EMT and paramedic, you're going to, or MFR through paramedic, I should say, you're going to find a lot of course resources here. You're going to find information on your BLS competency portfolio, That handbook that we talked about is here. There's scenario templates so you can practice like you'll perform. It shows you a completed student portfolio if you're going to be using the student's portfolio as a portion of this. And then we also want to think about the fact that you have to have an educational program psychomotor adherence statement that your organization will fill out and sign, saying this is how you're going to hold your national registry exam, and this is how you're going to make sure that you stay compliant. And again, anytime that you're doing a renewal, this has to go in, and it basically just says within your period that you're going to maintain the files and the associated components that are necessary for a minimum of 7 years to comply with their exam assurance. You're also going to find down here an initial education flowchart procedure. This is important. We post this to our website under our student resources page for EMS students because it's a little bit of a clunky process, but this is what you need to be aware of as you're navigating the approval process for students. So some of the things that are critical here, 60 days prior to the course, you're going to see 60 days is a really common thing here, right? The program director completes the initial program approval form and submits it to the Michigan EMS education coordinator for review. It's reviewed. If it's approved, you get a thing sent to you, and that happens for a 3-year period. So KCC, our renewal is coming up at the end of August. 60 days before that, so at the end of July, yeah, ends in August. So at the beginning of July, I believe, I had to look at a calendar to make sure I'm right, but 60 days before roughly, I have to make sure that's all submitted. There's a lot of work that goes into that. I can't start that initial program approval form and process of documentation the night before it's due. I'm going to have to spend a good couple of weeks probably prepping and reviewing and making sure that stuff is in order, especially if it's your first time doing it, because you probably don't have program policies and you probably don't have clinical contracts and you probably don't have a medical director depending on the license level that you're working with. Once you get that approval, right, then you can go ahead and you put all that information, you upload all that class information 30 days before the course starts, right? So this is 90 days out before the actual class can start. We have to think about this process. And so we're going to go ahead and say, okay, 30 days before, I'm going to send out my course approval. It's going to get approved through the state, hopefully, and then it's going to be in the actual course will begin. From there, 6 weeks before the course ends, or about the halfway point of your program, we want students to go through and create accounts on the NREMT and create accounts through the state's e-licensing portal, right? And there is that information sheet we've seen of how to be able to do that and directions that we can give to the students, right? The final week of the course, students again log in to take their NREMT. At that point, they can apply to take the test. Students can log in and complete all their applications to be able to make the test. The program director then can go ahead and submit all the course completion documents to the portal as well. And that's kind of where we get into this little part here. So I'm going to just kind of go down. So for here, we're getting all that instructions information to students so they can complete it if they haven't already done so. The students got to pass the psychomotor exam. If they pass everything like they're supposed to, then yes, they're eligible for Michigan licensure. If the answer is no, the student schedules a retest if they fail their psychomotor exam. Once all of the students have passed, then at this point, the program director completes the roster in the e-licensing portal. I'll show you the roster in a second. And then you're going to go ahead and submit that into the state. You no longer have to mail a copy of the course completion because this is actually now attached in the e-licensing or in the portal. From there, once you've submitted and you've put your date of completion and all of your students in there that they have passed and or failed, then you are going to be able to go ahead and submit that to the state and then immediately go in to the NREMT and then verify the students have completed their the class component and then also completed that they have done their psychomotor exam for MFR or EMT levels. And then at that point in time, the student is eligible to go take the test through Pearson VUE. Once they've done that, then they are eligible to apply for licensure once they've passed it. If not, the student will have to go back and retest through the NREMT as normal. So again, this is a really helpful tool for you to be able to use when it comes to that, looking at how to do that. Here is how to create the e-licensing account. Nothing too crazy here, but it will kind of walk the students through what they need to be able to do to create an e-licensing account. You've seen that already. And again, that user guide is there on the site as well too. E-licensing course completions. There's again another diagram here. This is for requesting an initial refresher. It'll talk to you about all the information that you'll need to do and the process to make sure that you've done it properly. So again, a lot of really great instructions that are all on the state's website. And then, get back up here. And then down here, we've got pass rates. So again, these are from 2022. Under IC, you're going to see here IC pass rates again as well too. Talks about 3 years of field experience providing direct patient care at the applicable level, and then currently a licensed EMS provider at or above the level applicable to the IC. That's kind of your instructor requirements. Nothing too crazy there. Continuing education, here's a lot of those links when you think about when you're building your continuing education aspects. The lesson plan guidebook we shared, your attendance roster, a program schedule, certificate of attendance, the license renewal requirements for providers, along with the CE record form for them. This is the lesson plans for live virtual pediatric medication administration. So if you're going to do an actual virtual medication administration, the state has their own lesson plan for this, which is nice. And hopefully it will populate. There you go. Yeah, see, there it goes. And again, we can kind of see where some of that comes in. It talks about how that's going to be able to happen for that timeline. So when you're looking to use this, we want to use that same style of lesson plan. Don't recreate the wheel, right? It keeps jumping me lower than I want to. And then again, you get lesson plan samples, then your lesson plan fillable forms, a lot of the things that you've seen on your Moodle page. When that page closes, you're going to have to use the state's website to be able to use some of that. Education program sponsors. So now we're talking about you're going to want to, where you want to become a program sponsor specifically for your program. Here you're going to find applications to do that. This is your initial education and your renewal program sponsor application. This is that thing I told you you got to have in 60 days before you submit anything for your course. Again, per that, let me see if I can find that flow chart here. Here we go. For that flow chart right here, this is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to close some of these other tabs, guys. There we go. So again, you can see we got to make sure we kind of follow that flow. And this is what you're going to see. Now, the interesting part about this is there are some key information that's in here, but a lot of these things are going to be required to be attached to the PDF document. So you're going to save files into the PDF document. Is one of the most interesting ways of being able to do it. Let me kind of get down here when it starts to get into some of these things. So let's see here. These are going to be documents and things that they're going to want to be able to see as you were to go down through your form. So I'm going to start back at the top. It's a 13-page document, but there's quite a bit of information that's in here. So again, this application has to be completed between both the program sponsor and the program director, or the IC. And this is all based on the approval of the education program based on Public Act 368 of 1978 as amended. These rules are going to be required by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Bureau of EMS Preparedness. I can't remember what their and standard of care. There's a new name for the Bureau again. I'm not even sure which one it is anymore. But nonetheless, this program sponsor approval is received. You'll get a certificate for it, and it's good for a 3-year period. The form itself has to be submitted 60 days prior to the program expiration. So if our program expires in August 31st of 2024, I have to have everything in no later than July 1st of 2024. I got to have that 60 days in to be able to do. And so you will need that 60-day time period to make sure that you are really giving yourself the time and energy to be able to do this. And as we go through this, you're going to see a lot of the information that's going to be here. Now, if you are an initial education program sponsor, you can use this form as well to be able to complete your CEU sponsor as well, your CE program sponsorship. You can do those separately. You can have a CE program sponsorship on its own, or and not have initial education, or vice versa. A lot of places, if you can get through the CEU program sponsor, it's really a nice way to be able to use for CE education, especially within an organization. So eligibility, first and foremost, you got to check one of the things that you have to be able to be, right? So anything above an MFR level is going to really require you to be able to be affiliated with a sponsor, right? So the state wants to make sure that you are officially sponsored by something, whether that's a post-secondary school, a proprietary school, a life support approved agency, military, hospital, adult education center, high school or vocational tech center, it doesn't matter. Has to be within one of those, right? So I, as an IC, can't just go out and hold a paramedic class in my garage. I have to have it partnered with I can hold it in my garage as long as I'm partnered with a sponsor of some kind, like an ambulance agency. Again, once this is all completed, it's going to have to get sent over to the Michigan Department of Health EMS email for education. It says if applying for the paramedic level, the program sponsor must be a post-secondary high school, vocational school, technology school, proprietary school, or an adult education center or hospital. That's required by CAHAP, the Committee on Accreditation for the Allied Health Professions, which is the accrediting body of EMS. The interpreters of those said standards from CAHAP is the Committee on Accreditation, and that's for us, it's for the EMS profession, or COA EMSP. So again, if we are going for that, we do have to make sure that we let them know that we have a letter of review or other communications that are going to show that we have met specific requirements for that paramedic level. Paramedic is governed by the national accreditation, by CAHAP standards, which are interpreted by the Committee on Accreditation. In this case, our Committee on Accreditation, because CAHAP covers a number of different programs, medical assisting, all over the place. EMS is one of them, paramedic specifically, and then again, we have to make sure that we follow those guidelines. If you're not a COA approved program, or are not in the process of becoming a COA approved program for EMS, you won't be able to hold paramedic level education. Other than that, you can pick what's there. For program sponsor, there's some key things that the program sponsor has to do. The program sponsor is going to be that high level administrator. Sometimes they're more involved, sometimes they're less involved, but there are core things that they have to be able to do. One, the sponsor representative has to visit the classroom, and they got to talk to the students, and they got to make sure they're watching the faculty. They got to be engaged at least at that level. They have to schedule student interviews and survey student progression, addressing concerns and issues that may rise to their level. And they're going to be in charge for writing written reports from faculty to the sponsor at designated intervals during the course with specific factors. So when a program director does an annual report, they're going to need to be involved with the program sponsor, and also need to make sure the program sponsor is involved in writing those reports as well too. And then again, all of the program materials, all the records is responsible, the individual responsible for that is the program sponsor. Now the program director, again, they have to be a licensed provider and an EMS instructor coordinator in the state of Michigan. And they have to, a provider license has to be held at or higher than the education that they're going to provide. So as an EMT, I have to be an EMT and be an EMT IC, and I can then teach at the EMT level, and that is as high as I can go. I can teach anything below that, but I can't go any higher than that. I could be a paramedic who is an EMT IC, because maybe I haven't been a paramedic long enough to earn those 3 years, but maybe I've been an EMT for 5 years, or a combination of thereof of more than 3. I may start out as an EMT IC. So I got my paramedic license, start out as an EMT IC, and then once I get my 3 years experience providing direct patient care at the paramedic level, then I can become that paramedic level IC. There has to be a current curriculum vitae, or a copy of the resume, along with all the licenses that show that they're credentialed. The program director must be formally affiliated or contracted with the course sponsor. There has to be a letter or some type of agreement to verify that. There has to be a written position outlining the program director's responsibilities, job responsibilities, and the program director has to understand that they're responsible for darn near everything when it comes to the site and the education of location approvals. Now, there are some Michigan Department of Health and Human Services approval and reapproval guidelines that you have to have. So the IC at or above the level of the education program and included on their instructor list must be present during all their didactic psychomotor classes. So if you're an IC and you are teaching, you are listed as the IC for instruction for that program, and you are having someone else teach for you, and maybe they're not an IC, maybe they're just a content expert, they still have to be approved through the state and submitted on this list. But we also want to make sure that we recognize that they have to be vetted to be qualified. But regardless, if they're not an IC, the IC has to be present in the room, visually seeing what's going on when that instruction is occurring, no matter if it's didactic or psychomotor. Other than a few exceptions, the IC has to be there. So here's where we look at healthcare provider CPR classes. If you're a healthcare provider, BLS instructor, you don't have to be an IC. You can teach CPR. Hazardous materials. If you're a hazmat instructor, you're more qualified than an IC to teach. If you've got prerequisites at the college level, like your A&P or your pharmacology courses that's taught by a professor that's well-versed in those areas but is not well-versed in EMS, that's okay as well too, as long as the required hours for the curriculum are going to meet those specifically. If those content hours don't line up, they got to be taken out of the total list of content objectives or time. It has to match up with the state curriculum. And when a qualified instructor or subject matter expert is utilized, you again need to make sure that you follow the specific policy here. Here's a link that opens. So that you're actually going to be able to ensure that you're following the policy correctly. So again, it talks about what is there, what qualifications have to be there. The policy basically says subject matter expert may teach an individual course in education for no more than 25% of the course hours and no more than 5 consecutive class days. A subject matter expert may teach continuing education programs provided that they have the qualifications below. And again, you can kind of see where just most of theirs here. And again, the purpose of this is if they are not a subject matter expert and a qualified instructor, then they're not going to be able to be in the classroom on their own. So when a state of Michigan licensed instructor or coordinator is not present in the classroom, a subject matter expert may be used in that initial education training, but you have to go through and you have to make sure that you've got the approval for them to be a subject matter expert. And again, you got to make sure you can document those things. And they should be listed as an instructor for your location. And then prior to any course start date, the program director has to notify the local med control. You got to let your med control know what's going on. Luckily for us here at KCC, we are part of the med control, so it's a little bit easier for us. But we need to make sure we know what those locations are. And if there's anyone else, like institutional faculty, we want to know what their name is and what their email address is, so that way if they're there for the program, another person can be there to be contacted. All the instructors need to make sure that they are utilized within the instructional faculty, which are approved. To do that, we need to submit credentials, resume, copies of their current licenses that are there, and again, that they need to have some type of agreement that they are a part of the training aspect for that sponsor, and then a written position for them must be attached as well too. Typically, these are mostly for our full-time folks, I would say, or regular educators. A lot of our adjuncts, they are submitted with their curriculum vitae and then their licenses, but we're not looking to use them as subject matter experts, really. We're just making sure that they're there. For your medical director, you do have to have a physician director, as it's required for all initial education programs other than MFR. EMT specialist, paramedic, and paramedic have to have a medical director. Medical first responders do not. The physician has to be a medical director, a medical doctor or a doctor of orthopedics or DO. We also want to make sure we have their license and a copy of their curriculum vitae as well, and then a contract between them and the sponsor. And that's important to outline what their job responsibilities are. And then more importantly, they have to have experience in some type of current practice, whether it's EMS system, medical direction, medical control, if they've taken a medical director course, whatever it might be, they have to have some type of experience in the clinical and current expertise in emergency medical care. Dr. Vicki Norris is a DO. She's our medical director for the college here for EMS. She is not the medical director for the county. She's just for education. She's a certified instructor in ACLS, BLS, PALS, PHTLS. She teaches a lot of our merit badge courses, our AHA courses, and then also is a licensed emergency room physician, and so board certified. And so those things are going to be some of the documentations that we'll use to vet her criteria as well. Lastly, for this component, we got to talk about, well, not lastly, but one of the bigger components is going to be the advisory committee. You can click on the link there to see what specific documents that are going to be needed for this, but you got to meet at least once a year for your advisory committee. Now, if you're doing things at the paramedic level, there's a lot more requirements and things that have to be done that are required by KHEP and COAMPS. But nonetheless, you have to have at least one per year. And you want to make sure that you get feedback regarding program competencies. COAMPS specifically has program goals and minimum competencies that they use. We have to sign off every year. That's fine. We do it for all of our programming, for all of our levels, whether it's MFR, EMT, paramedic, it doesn't matter. They're involved for all of that. We also want to make sure that the majority of the members that are there are interested and well-versed, right? So we've got graduates in the programs, we've got current students from the programs, we have employers, we have hospital partners, we have a community representative, we have fire representatives, police representatives, administration representatives from the different organizations that we work with, the different high schools that we work with, right? All those things need to be there to help us make sure that we're doing that. And then we want to make sure the majority of the members on the committee are not instructors, that are not just the people that are running the show. You want this to be made up of a group of people that it's going to truly be able to advise your program on best practices and needs to meet the demands of the industry. You do have to make sure you take meeting minutes, and those meeting minutes have to be available during the on-site review. We have to have a written statement from the chief financial officer as well for financial support. Some programs run off hardly any money at all. At KCC, we have a very large, robust budget for all of our training. Regardless of how much or how little, you got to have a statement that shows that there is some type of financial support from the program sponsor. You also have to look at the facility. The facility has to make sure that there's enough writing space for each student, appropriate restrooms, lighting, heating, audio-visual components. Lab space has to be big enough to carry out the skills. And then you got to have a policy for making a reasonable accommodations for ADA requirements. Also talks about the audio-visual components as well for the class, so what monitors or projectors are needed, screen services to broadcast, speakers, backup computer, technical assistant, maintenance, all that stuff is there as well too. And then equipment. This is oftentimes really forgotten. There's a lot of equipment that has to be used within these, and it's definitely going to be something that you're going to want to make sure that you're paying close attention to. And then a link of all the required equipment based on the license level you can find here as well too. And again, you can see it won't be the world's largest list, but it's definitely going to be one that's going to be pretty big. So things to be able to kind of think about. Yep, so you can see MFR, EMT, advanced EMT, and then on to paramedic. And again, it's a culmination list. Operating procedures, again, you got to have liability insurance, general liability insurance. You got to make sure that you got an ADA policy and that the ADA policy from the NREMT is available. We want to make sure that your handbook or syllabus has a non-discrimination policy, and that we look for information regarding in the syllabus or in the handbook harassment issues, Title IX components. We also need to have program evaluation policies and procedures about how we evaluate our instructors, the students in the course, and a way in which we have a written action plan for improvements that are made within the program. We do have to have a library of resources. So for us at a college, it's easy. We have a library. We have a lot of online tools as well too, but it is important that you have some type of resource library for your students, and that now can easily be done and through distance library services. Clinical resources, there's a number of things you have to recognize here for the legislator for Michigan for students to be attending clinical. There needs to be written agreements, and these contracts must be signed and authorized to cover each 3-year approval period. So that means every 3 years you got to renew your contracts. That was a challenge for us here at KCC because we had blanket contracts, the contracts that just didn't expire, and we had to go back and get amendments to those to make sure that they were there. And again, it's going to outline what you would use for both hospitals and the EMS agencies as well. You got to make sure that all the students have a syllabus and other clinical documents that are going to be associated with clinical participation. We actually have a clinical precept or a clinical handbook now that's separate from our EMS handbook because there's so much that is involved with that. We got to make sure each of our students are properly fitted for N95, and if they can't be fitted with an N95, we send them with a PAPR to make sure that we're OSHA and MyOSHA compliant. And then again, we've got to make sure we track where our students are going and coming, verification that they were there, making sure we've got clinical objectives so the students know what they're going to be doing. Information about infectious control and personal protective equipment when they're in the clinical setting, policies on exposures, what to do if there's a bloodborne pathogen exposure or needle stick, just a number of different things that you can be able to see. Again, we're also need to have students sign an acknowledgement of the syllabus or their understanding of the procedures and policies that are there. And then the program director is going to be utilizing the national education standards, the DOT, NISHA state components, all those objectives to do our training. We have to have an admission policy, a criminal history policy, an attendance policy, a grading scale, successful course completion, an appeals process, a guidance procedures, a health and safety policy, disclosure policy and procedure. You can see how this goes on and on and on. Textbooks, dress code, course completions, operational procedures, and then program evaluation procedures as well too. All of these things are going to be things that you're going to want to take a look at. You got to understand the psychomotor exams portions of it, how you're going to be able to do that. That's that affirmation statement that you'll sign. You got to send in copies of all your course schedules, locations for any satellites that you might have. And then from this point on, we start to get into CE program sponsorship. So if we're doing a CE consortium, what that means, how our program evaluation, what our advisory committee does, making sure that we have our applications all completed. And then if you're doing instructor coordinator criteria, there's a couple other things. The big thing here is the individual aspects that you have to have in order to teach an IC class. Not everybody can just teach an IC class. You have to have an individual who possesses a bachelor's degree in education and demonstrate a teaching experience. I do not have a bachelor's in education. I have a bachelor's in EMS and management. Any baccalaureate degree with teaching certificate at the elementary or secondary level. I'm not a K through 12 or a secondary educator. I'm just a paramedic guy. But boy, oh boy, I do have a master's in education. And so that's what makes it so that I can be able to teach a portion of this. And then we got to make sure we attach a degree for that as well too. And then it talks about what you have to be able to do for student teaching requirements, for initial and continuing education. They got to do lesson plans. They got to make sure that they're, evaluated by an IC licensed instructor. They got to have all the files there. And then certification courses do not count towards student teaching. And then there's signature pages at the end. And that kind of wraps up the overall process here for anything involved within a new initial education program sponsor. And so as we go back here, right, that's where you're going to find all of those wonderful, I'm going to go back up here again, policies. Make sure I get to the right here, and policies here. So this is going to be that entire process we looked for here for the education. There's a policy, that's the renewal form we just went through. Here's the CEU version. There's the EMS Initial Education Analysis and Improvement Plan, or the PIP, that is there as well too. So if you have pass rates that fall low, distance learning policy, subdramatic expert policy, a lot of the other policies that we've discussed are all going to be listed here as well too. So that's one of the major areas I think that you really want to make sure you take a look at. Next things here, you're going to have education scopes of practice, national education standards, program requirements and objectives, med-legal curriculum, all that awesome stuff is here. Same thing when it comes down to our DOT guidelines for instructor coordinator. And then you have all your audit sheets here as well too. So if you're going to run a class and you're going to do an initial education course, you got to make sure you have the right number of hours and content per each individualized area. Easily you'd be able to do that through this document here. It kind of just gives you an overview of what's there, and then you can kind of break down what you're doing in that. This is again an audit sheet to make sure you have the minimum hours in each category and the total overall minimum hours that is required per the state. And you can even see some things like RN to EMT or RN to paramedic courses as well too. Those are things that you can do. And then here's a great spot to be able to get to those two really awesome websites. EMS.gov is one I use a lot, and then the COAMPS one. Those are probably the biggest ones that I use on a routine basis. So overall, that is going to be the biggest aspect of some of the things that you're going to see from the state's website. And so now we're going to go ahead and we'll go back to our Module 25 and get started kind of going through some of those key areas again, talking about the specifics that's outlined in the content. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look here at Module 25 now as we continue to look at some of the more specifics after looking at the state's website. Again, if we're thinking about the introduction and the coordination concepts, we're going to want to talk about what the general responsibilities of the program coordination would be. These include things like program development and other coordination issues you might see as a program director. So some of the things we have to do, we've got to talk about the process for program sponsor approval and renewal. We've done that quite a bit. We've taken a look at that form in great detail. We need to explain the roles of what the program director is, the physician director, the medical director, and then the responsibility of the instructional faculty. We've taken a look at those responsibilities as well too. We've identified the provisions for clinical objectives and student clinical evaluation. We've talked about student policies, operational policies, program evaluation, and then curriculum from Michigan specifically, and then the scope of practice for Michigan as well too. The next area that we got to look at is going to be based on professional mentors. So one of the things that we think about a lot of times when it comes to clinical education or content expert instruction is that we need to have these as professional mentors. We want students that have appropriate resources for success that can be implemented, whether it's working specifically to improve your skills as an instructor, or if it's working to improve program policies, or other issues, things around equity, inclusion, diversity, any number of those fashions can easily have an impact on your program coordination as well too. Again, we've taken a look before here at the state level for Michigan. We look at the licensing and complaint allegation. If you want to use this link, you actually have to copy the full HTML link here and paste it in there. I'll give you a quick idea what that will look like. Here you can see the complaint and disciplinary actions of the website. One of the things that I think are really important when we think about individualized complaints, yeah, there's a number of ways that you can look at filing complaints in here, but I want to point out the most common complaints that the state sees as items are progressing through. One of the first things that you're going to see here is patient care violations, practicing without a license, drug diversion, criminal conduct, or unprofessional conduct that might endanger the public. Yeah, I know it says EMS instructor coordinators, but if you're providing education that is incorrect, that can harm the public, and that's a concern. If you go down here under the educational program section, these are the big four things that we see within education that really cause problems for program sponsors or for initial education or even CE sponsors for that matter. First is going to be not following what you submit. You're not conducting the course according to the approved schedule that you submitted to the state of Michigan. If you're going to do something, you need to stick with what you said you're going to do and be prepared that the state has the right, the authority to come in and audit your class at any moment in time. That's why we submit those schedules to them. Unprofessional conduct is another one, especially if an individual is going to receive a complaint from a student. There's a number of ways that we can think about professionalism when it comes to that. And then unqualified instructors, those that are not licensed instructor coordinators, that are not approved subject matter experts, or even individuals helping that are not necessarily included on your roster for instructional staff or even lab assisting help. Those are key things you want to make sure you avoid is have the right people with the right credentials there. Don't cut those corners. And then again, not coordinating or maintain the records for student performance, for clinical experience, for evaluations. All of those things become really critical when you start to look at maintaining your accreditation, your state sponsorship. All of those things are really important. That documentation really has to be there. Again, there's a link here that you can go and follow through for more specific legislations aspects. Again, we're talking about Public Act 179 and Public Act 367. I believe it's 367. Again, there's another aspects that here you can see some of the subcommittees that you may see within the EMSCC or the EMS Coordination Committee. The Quality Assurance Task Force is a really good committee. The Education Committee is a great one to be on as well too, especially as an educator or if you're new. If you have an opportunity to attend those meetings, they are open to the public, or even to be a member of that committee. That would be something that I would encourage you to be able to do. And then there's some other Michigan EMS specific sites as well too. The first one here is the SMEMSIC, or Society of Michigan EMS Instructor Coordinators. This is a great place to be able to go through and get CEs. There's online CEs that are available with the discount. There's the annual professional development conference. It's a great way of seeing some really great speakers who generally speak nationally. There's awards that are in here. Liability insurance as a member, you can easily go ahead and get another, I believe it's $1 million in liability insurance through them. And I always want to point out to here that when you look at this, you can also, you guys are eligible for a student membership. So your first membership to the IC Society is free. After that, it's $75 per year, and it does get you discounts to attend the conference. So I definitely would encourage you to apply to become a member. You can easily do so just by clicking become a member here. And then CEs and things will all be there. There's a great amount of resource sharing that you can do, event posting and things of that nature. The other one is the Michigan Ambulance Association. So the Michigan Association of Ambulance Services, I should say, MAS, is another really great way to get some information. I would like this quite a bit because of the legislative agenda that they have. Kind of tells us about what Michigan is looking to do to help with the staffing crisis that exists. There's also a number of different resources that you can see for quality assurance, for rural EMS, for cost data collection, conferences, you name it. This is another really good site to be able to use. You also have NEMSI, which is a National Association of EMS Educators. I love this. This is another one that I belong to. It's a great way of networking outside of the state of Michigan. Oftentimes in Michigan alone, we really just kind of have our way of doing things, and it seems like it's getting better, but folks don't always have the same level of willingness to share. And so when you go to these national conferences, you're going to find people that are definitely willing to help you and are definitely willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you avoid some of the pitfalls that they fell into. And this is another really awesome way to be able to get that information. They do offer an EMS instructor training. It comes into part 1 and part 2. This EMS instructor coordinator training you're taking now equates to that, if it doesn't, even if it doesn't supersede it, maybe. But the awesome part behind this is that you're going to have a number of online resources with your membership that you have access to. That's a repository of shared resources, connections, just a number of really awesome resources, especially as a new instructor. The next one you have to look at here is the NASEMSO guidelines. This is the National Association of State EMS Officials. These are really, really great when it comes down to your national protocols. And the one I want to show you here is the model of EMS clinical guidelines. And here we can click on that guidelines right here, and this should be version 3, I believe. You can tell I was looking at it earlier. Yeah, version 3. So these are the national education guidelines. And I'm going to go over here to a cardiovascular care. You can see they're very similar to state protocols, but they're nationally driven. They are research and evidence-based driven. So you're not going to find we do this because. If these are things that we're implementing, it's going to be very specific in regards to its outcomes. And again, these are going to be sources that are going to be cited. So it talks about a common cardiovascular illness, in this case being syncope or near syncope. Talks about aliases, patient care goals, the way the patient will present, inclusion and exclusion criteria. Again, so as to be able to develop a differential diagnosis, the specific assessment. These are going to be all the way from basic all the way up through paramedic. They don't differentiate that. Your treatments and interventions. And then this is the part that I really like, which is the notes or the educational pearls. Things that we want to make sure that our students are being able to take a close look at. We also look at things like pertinent assessment findings, and then quality improvement, key documentation elements, other things that you may see for performance measures, right? Those are going to be critical aspects that this guideline will help you do, and it is one of the items or one of the components that's used for the task analysis for the National Registry for their exam writing. COAMPS is another big one that I like to go to. Again, I always encourage you to, instead of saving and downloading files, save these websites because you can easily get back to them quite a bit. For those that are looking to do paramedic level accreditation or just some even better national tools, COAMPS has a lot of information for you. You can easily search their website here, join their mailing list. But I would say the area that I typically use the most, here is what we say. We say about resource library. And in here, there's quick links to a number of different things, and you're going to find applications for being able to create a program, the specific KHEP standards guidelines, and the COAMPS interpretations of those. There's the 23, and then the 23, and then the previous standards. Here's the 15 standards that are there. Clinical coordination documentation, instruments and forms, everything from advisory committees to skill sheets to counseling forms, medical director information, how to be able to do a medical director review, all those different components, policies and procedures, program directors, minimum numbers, assessment matrix, and a bunch of other sample aspects that you can see as well. So again, this is another really nice way that you can easily go through and assess some of those areas. The KHEP website's another one that's great to go to. KHEP website is going to be the accrediting body for EMS, and those standards are interpreted by our Committee on Accreditation. For us, that would be the Committee on Accreditation for the EMS profession, or COAMPS. Again, you can see that these are some things we're starting to really drive a lot of these aspects when it comes to national accreditation with paramedic. We also have EMS.gov, which we've talked about before quite a bit. I won't pull that back up. And then CAPC, which is going to be your education credits that you can have as well for the Commission on Accreditation for Pre-Hospital Continuing Accreditation, or pardon me, Continuing Education. So again, those are some really awesome sites that you can be able to go to. Other aspects that we've got to make sure that we recognize here, professional behavior. One of the things that we need to make sure that we're doing with our professional behavior is that we're identifying the code of ethics. And that's a requirement as an initial education, is that you need to go over the National AEMT, or NAEMT, National Association of EMTs Code of Ethics, along with the State of Michigan's Code of Ethics. That's really important for us to be able to do. We know that we want to make sure that we really think about how our students perform on a professional level. This is what our industry is setting out to establish ourselves as a profession, to be able to move up and be seen as a healthcare practitioner rather than a technician. And so this is the areas that we have to really think about with our students, imparting this core information upon them when they're the most impressionable during that initial education, and then reinforcing it as you continue to travel through the program. The A-factor domain, these are common areas that you would see that we want to make sure that you're recognizing these are the professional behaviors that we're shooting for. Again, this is be assessed and measured through the affective professional behavior evaluation. There are also things we want to make sure that you value as an EMS instructor. We talk about ethics and morals. We talk about empowerment and helping students with self-esteem, valuing their experiences, valuing their diversity, their backgrounds, their rights, and using mentorship to help students not only navigate the course material and your aspects as an instructor, but also to help them be more successful outside of their program as well. Another area that we have to think about is bias. Bias, by definition, is an inclination of temperament or outlook, especially a personal and sometimes unreasonable judgment. We know bias can be intentional and unintentional. What's referred to as implicit bias or unconscious bias is where you oftentimes will have a bias, but you don't really know that you believe that, right? It's often contradicted of how they feel of what they believe. And that's important that we recognize that. That's an implicit bias. Explicit bias is going to be a person that is clear about their feelings or attitudes towards someone. So if you're explicit would be someone who's racist or someone who's xenophobic or things of that nature. We also want to make sure that we have a discussion about our bias with our students and how that plays a role into our professionalism. We want to use that affective evaluation to help us be able to broaden our students' perspectives, and also make sure that we provide them with examples of policies for discrimination and what can happen to the student up to and including dismissal from the program for for identifying that type of behavior, that explicit bias behavior. We also got to remember that we deal a lot with career and technical education, CTE education. This group is typically not yet quite adult learners. They are oftentimes more mature or have more life experience than some adults do, but they are definitely not quite fully developed. Your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25. And so things that we got to recognize when it comes to their cognitive learning is that these guys are pretty good at adapting to their learning environment. We also know that they like to work as a team, and in EMS we like to work as a team, I should say, but not oftentimes do these young students understand what that looks like. If you take a group of high school students and you say, hey, do a scenario, they may not have any idea what that scenario is or how to do that. You may have to actually do some instruction around that. We also have to think about their professional affect, right? Like what's the importance of that professional behavior. Again, we talked about this before, making sure that we really impart that strong foundation of what a professional is and what's expected of a professional within our industry. We also have to think about death. Young learners are not quite adult learners, oftentimes have not had the life experience maybe with dealing with death. And to be able to experience that at such a young and impressionable age, it really can cause some concerns. And so as you think about sending your students into the clinical setting, we really have to think about spending more time on death and dying and what's in our control, what's not in our control, grieving, how you feel, the emotions that you have, that it's okay to have those emotions and those feelings, and it's okay to ask for help if you feel that way, because they're, again, not used to seeing that. And EMS, someone's worst day is our every day, but for a young adult learner, that may be something that really could be traumatic for them, and we don't want that to be the case. We want this to be a good learning experience overall for them. And then the social learning theory is the other component that we look at, right? So attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. So we want to make sure that we're keeping their attention, that we're keeping them retained within the class, that we're working on focusing and getting them to reproduce products, right? And then doing what we can to find those things that will motivate those students to do well. We have talked drastically about SMART goals. Again, it's an acronym, stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. These are the objectives that we want to see. Yes, the DOT curriculum from 2002 will say something different, but this is what the state of Michigan wants us to use because they are a much better objective or goal. When you're thinking about these SMART goals or SMART objectives, a lot of the feedback I've given you throughout the program so far has been, if you were to write an objective, by the completion of this lesson, the student will be able to understand the topics of X, Y, and Z. It's very hard to measure and achieve understanding. Like how do you quantify that? Like how do you measure that, right? Maybe that's going to be through a better action verb of listing or describing or diagramming or whatever it might be, performing. Those things would be a better way of describing that objective, and SMART objectives help you create that framework so that you get there the first time out the gate. We also talk about FERPA. FERPA is the Family Education's Right and Privacy Act. Again, it protects students' information under the privacy, under a legal aspect for privacy. At the college, any student, no matter if they're 18 or not, they are considered to be an individualized adult student, and we're not supposed to be sharing any information with anyone else but that student directly, unless we receive written permission and there's a specific form that has to be utilized to make sure that it meets the requirements of the Department of Education. And so that's really important to that, right? We want to make sure that we spend time thinking about case law and things that have impacted those areas of privacy. We also have the Teach Copyright Act. The Teach Copyright Act is in essence, deals with Technology Education Copyright Harmonization Act of 2002. Basically, it talks about what you can and cannot use, right? You've got to make sure that you're on top of copyright. You cannot just search the internet and grab stuff off of it, put your name on it, and call it yours. You will get sued at some point for copyright infringement. It doesn't mean that you can't utilize, but you've got to reference and you have to request permission before you try to do those things. If you take someone else's work and change just a few things and call it your own, you really are going to have some major issues. And as educators, academic integrity is of the utmost importance. And so we want to make sure that we're not cutting those corners just as we would not have our students do. We spent a lot of time talking about accreditation standards. Again, from a governmental standpoint, we talked about it for proprietary schools or what's required. For sponsorship, we've also talked about the accreditation standards for KHEP and COAMPS and the differences that they require in that program sponsor. Again, those accreditation standards are important that you stay up on, and again, I would encourage you to check out that COAMPS website. The last thing that we got to look at here is going to be the construction of written exams in a blueprint. When you're using a blueprint, you're writing written exams for a general purpose, whether it's a formative assessment or whether it's a summative assessment, high stakes or low stakes, what have you. The goal of this is to see if has the content or the curriculum we've instructed, have we met the benchmark that we were looking to achieve with our students, and that's where the assessment will come into play. As we look to do this, we really have to be using our course objectives, starting back with that really granular level and looking at, again, specifically what we're going to be assessing them on, what objectives we're assessing them on. From there, we're going to want to make sure we align the percentage of total questions or points that we're looking at based on some of those objectives. We're going to go ahead and number those items to determine where the competencies would be within that blueprinting. And then we're also going to make sure that we multiply each section's percentage by the total exam length to determine the number of questions that is needed for each section. That's a really great way of being able to establish that blueprint. If you're using, and that's generally what you would do if you were starting from scratch. If you're using a vendor, a lot of times blueprinting will be done very similar, but it may be based on Bloom's taxonomy or difficulty of the question. And you're going to, again, do that blueprint or build out that scale, if you will, of the content, the number of questions that you're going to have, so that you can ensure that the assessment you're giving covers the breadth and the depth of the content, specifically the goals and objectives you've set. So there's a number of best practices, right? Again, each should be based on one type of content and cognitive demand. We want to use new material each time we do our testing to elicit that higher level or higher order thinking. We want to keep the content items independent from one another. We don't want to mix too much stuff together. It makes it hard for us to get a true good assessment. We also want to make sure that we test important content and avoid specific, overly specific content that may otherwise, or too general of content, because that may not really give us any good value or meaning as we create that test. We also want to avoid opinions unless they're qualified, avoid trick items, make sure that each item is vertically instead of horizontally organized, formatted specifically, so that each are going to be about that same aspect of length. We want to make sure you edit and proof your items. If you can have others read it, that's another great way of doing that. Minimize the amount of reading that's going to be in the item or the stem. Make sure that you excuse me, state your central idea. If you have a set idea that you want to be able to do for this and you want to get to that, cut to the chase. Don't give them more information than they need. Get right to the nitty-gritty. The goal is not to trick these students. Again, word the stem positively and avoid negative phrasing. Use only options that are plausible and discriminating. Again, meaning that things that are going to be those tricky, tasty distractors that students are going to want to pick. You also want to make sure that only one of the answers is a right answer, because oftentimes you can have two that are correct. You want to make sure that you have one that is truly correct. And then avoid using options of none of the above, all of the above, or any negative words, especially in your options like not this, not that, never this, things of that nature. When you're looking at grading for these things, essay items are great as long as you use a rubric. You can tell that we've used rubrics like crazy in this online class. Go ahead and steal those. You have my permission to use those. You may have a norm or a reference grading that you typically do. There may be criteria grading, especially for things like psychomotor skills. And you want to try to set a cut score. The cut score will be based on the difficulty. These are things that if you're going to do this, you have to develop your test question, test your test questions many times to make sure that it's validated, and then you have to go back to look at evaluating it for improvements. And you got to have a body of folks look to determine what the cut score of the difficulty would be of that test. That takes quite a bit to do. That's why a lot of folks are using vendors to help with these items. When I say vendors, I'm not talking the publisher's material, because that doesn't cut it. That publisher material is far below the critical thinking level and the higher ordered aspect that we need them to be at. Inter-rater reliability is another important aspect, especially when we're talking about psychomotor examinations. In essence, this is preparing you to make sure that all evaluators when given any situation with any student, would evaluate their performance with the same outcome. It, in essence, is a way in which we ensure that there's not one person that fails students and another person that only passes students, that everyone is trained equally. And to do that, we have to be able to spend some time with that. At KCC, before any of our psychomotor exams, we generally will, I'll use our EMT program as an example, we'll have everybody come in at 4:30. The class starts at 5:15. The first 30 minutes of our time together is to review the standards for the examination, the process, the policies, procedures, and then to focus on inter-rater reliability. How well can we rate, right? So we look at the scenarios, we talk about it as a group, we make sure all those things that we need to do to all be on the same page has taken place. So when we put students through our process, whether if it's an initial or a retest, there's consistency, and there again is a lack of bias, a personal bias, that the assessment is truly as objective as it can be. And again, we want to use standardized guidelines, objectives, checklists, things of that to help us keep that standardization as best we can. When it comes to validation for high stakes exams, we need to validate test items. And by doing so, it's going to allow for us to think of a number of different things. What domain are we teaching? Is that domain properly organized within our program? How does the universal generalization of our high stakes exams organize? How much fidelity is there between what we're shooting for and the universal generalization that we're seeing? Were any of the items edited? Is this a typical type of test for those test takers? So on and so forth. All those things make a big, big difference. So from there, you have virtual education. For the virtual education, you're really looking at generally the couple different ways. Live remote education, or what we would call synchronous virtual education. This is going to be a situation where you are on Zoom or Teams, and it's a live interaction. Things that you want to think about. What are you going to have your students wear when they're on a Zoom call? What are you going to do about their cameras? Do you require them to be on, to be off? Do you interact with your students, or is it completely passive where you just talk at the screen and they just absorb it? Are you doing other things to help improve your interaction, like using breakout rooms or Google Forms or Google Shared Docs that students can work on things and collaborate from different locations, but still have that collaboration experience together while in class? We also have recorded sessions. These are generally in a user-friendly format. They're generally very easily located by the student. But you got to have some policies regarding recording sessions, right? So like, how are you going to make sure that you know that your students complete these? We do tracking of these, and we have assignments that make proof of in a virtual setting of how you've grasped that content. And then again, we got to think about the improvement process, right? These improvement processes about creating SMART goals, doing a gap analysis, looking at your student evaluations critically, reviewing your program policies, finding tutors, right? Do you have tutors available for your students? Because not every instructor can be available all the time. Do you have mentorship opportunities, computer-based testing sites or prep sites, review instructor evaluations, right? Policies and procedures on that. After every semester, I sit down with the instructors and go over their core content, or probably not core content, but their evaluation of the key items that they can make improvements or things that they need kudos on. And then it gives us a way to be able to network with other instructor coordinators. There's a number of supplements that are included here, including the affective behavioral behavior evaluation tool, ethical scenarios, some simulation tools, and then some sample student teaching evaluations. So if you're trying to not recreate the wheel, here you go. There's that professional behavior evaluation. You could totally print it out and be able to use it. This bottom line here, you need to have both your signature and the student's signature on it. And again, the state requires a multitude of those. When you're thinking about ethical scenarios, there's some really great ethical scenarios that are here, and some links that the state has provided as well. Okay, you can see there's at least 4 of those. There's a simulation teaching toolkit, talks about preparation, conditions, accurate scenario, safety, and debrief. Debrief is where the learning will really occur. And then again, the preparation and conditions are going to be what give your students the buy-in factor for simulation. And then here's an example of some sample student teaching evaluations. You can obviously, this is not that robust. We have a much more robust one ourselves, but nonetheless, it does meet the requirement for the state. So overall, that's going to be the majority of your 24 and Module 25. I also wanted to make sure that I briefly showed you the EMS Program Director Manual, because this is another really good tool to be able to understand what are the administrative rules and responsibilities for each one of these items, for your advisory committee, for document requirements, syllabus requirements, so on and so forth. This is such a great tool to talk about who is supposed to do what, when it's supposed to happen, how it's supposed to happen, all those different things that you can see. Contact information. I printed this out and put it in a binder. That's what I did because I really felt like it was a really helpful component of this, right? And again, it's going to take you back. So, hey, you got to have applications for approval. Here, click on this guy. It's going to take you back to some of those aspects. It's going to let you go down through and see a number of different things, including tips and, key pearls of information, all that type of stuff that will be there as you go down through. I'm going to scroll pretty quick because I think there's some resources at the end as well, too. Yeah, so again, here's that professional behavior evaluation. This will be a certificate of completion that you can see. Here's going to be a student file checklist. All those things are going to help as you look to use that. So that's kind of the gist of it. I'm gonna leave it here with that because I think that's more than enough. It's about an hour and 30 minutes of me talking at you to show you these documents. But I really want you to spend some time digging into this program director, and then also spending time on those CE and initial program education sponsors, because at the end of the day, those are going to be the major things that you're going to see. So when the state comes in to do their overview, I want you to be prepared for some of the things that you're going to have and be able to ask questions that are going to be meaningful to you to get clarification on when we have that one-on-one time with our state education coordinators. So thank you guys again for contributing to our online learning, and we're getting very close to the end of our program here. So keep up the good work. You're all going to make great future educators. Thanks, guys.